Welcome to Daf Yud Gimel of Likkutei Torah, Sefer Vayikra. We're beginning with the Maimer Yamim, and as you have guessed, it discusses the spiritual meaning of Matzah at a few levels. So the pasuk says, "For 6 days you shall eat Matzah, and on the 7th day, עצרת will be a holiday for Hashem." So we need to understand why does it say here that we should eat matzah for 6 days? Elsewhere, it says that we eat matzah for 7 days. Pesach is a 7-day holiday in Eretz Yisrael. The explanation is that here, the meaning of the pasuk is not to tell us how many days we eat matzah for. We eat matzah, in other words, avoid chametz for 7 days. But what the pasuk is telling us here is how do we get to Atzeres, to a special Yom Tov on the 7th day of Pesach, on Shvish Pesach, that is through matzah for 6 days. Now, we need to understand what matzah accomplishes and what the meaning of Shvish or Pesach is and how we get there through matzah. But that's the basic idea of the pasuk. Also, the 7th day, Shvish or Pesach, which is a special Yom Tov, of course, commemorates Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea. In the original year of Pesach, when the year of the Exodus, so they only ate matzah. They only had a command to eat matzah for 1 day, the first day of Pesach, and then on the 7th day they still had Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea. So how come with us we need to eat matzah for 6 days in order to reach the 7th day Kriyas Yamsuf on Shvish Pesach? Furthermore, there's 2 times in the Torah where it uses the term Atzeres. Well, actually more than 2, but about Shvish Pesach it says Atzeres l'Hashem lekecha, whereas about Shmini Atzeres, which is at the end of Sukkot, it says Atzeres tia lachem. So Shvish Pesach is a festival, a holiday for Hashem, whereas Shmini Atzeres is a holiday for us. So we need to explain also the difference between Shvish Pesach and Shmini Atzeres. Another question, it says in the pasuk that they baked the dough that they took out of Egypt as matzah because it wasn't chametz, because they had been expelled from Egypt and they didn't have time to wait. So it implies that the reason why they ate matzah is because they were in a rush. They didn't have time for it to rise. But this does not fit with what the pasuk says earlier. It says that they were not allowed to eat matzah, and the pasuk implies, and the Gemara in Pesachim explains that they were not allowed to eat chametz for the first day. So that's why they ate matzah, because they weren't allowed chametz. So why does it say that they didn't eat chametz because they didn't have time to wait? A similar question on the Haggadah. In the Haggadah, when we explain Pesach, Matzah, and Maros, or explain Matzah, that the Matzah that we eat, Matzah Shaנו Okklim, al Shema, what do we eat the Matzah to represent? Al Shum Shalei Hispik Btzekah shall we say in Lahachmitz. We say in the Haggadah, it's because the dough of our forefathers didn't have time to rise. Until Hashem, the King of Kings, revealed himself to us, V'galam, and redeemed the Jewish people. But the same question, it's not because of that. It's not because they didn't have time and then Hashem revealed himself to us. It's simply because they had a mitzvah to eat matzah on the 15th night. Furthermore, the matzah that they ate on the 15th night was before midnight. That's when the command was. Whereas Hashem revealed to them only after midnight arrived. And the matzah that we eat at the Seder is also specifically before midnight. So how then could it commemorate the matzah, the matzah that they apparently ate after midnight when Hashem revealed himself to them? Okay, so to give the beginning of the answer, there are different levels of matzah. The original command to eat matzah which was for the first, just one-day commands, just for the 15th. So we have something similar today, that the only obligation to eat matzah is on the first night, the erev teichel matzahs. The pasuk says, in the evening you shall eat matzahs. It says matzahs without a vav. Whereas when it talks about the matzah that they ate when they were going out of Egypt, it says matzahs with a vav. Vav represents bringing down. The vav is like a hook that brings down from the top and brings it low and down into our realm, and it represents revelation. Therefore, there are two levels of matzah. There's the matzah before midnight, which is where there's limited revelation of Hashem, and then the matzah after midnight, which represents revelation of godliness. So in the Haggadah, we say that the matzah we eat at this Seder, we want it to be like the matzah after midnight, meaning that it should bring with it godly revelation. Similarly, in the pasuk yamim taakhal matzah, that you shall eat matzah for 6 days, and then on the 7th day will be a special holiday. There also it says matzah with a vav, which is what we're trying to achieve through the matzah, which brings with it revealed godliness. That's how we'll reach eating that for 6 days, and then through that we reach Shvi Pesach base. So to understand this further, let's first discuss eating in general. So the pasuk says, that not on bread alone does a man live, rather on the word of Hashem does a man live. Now the question is, how can food sustain us? We are humans, and therefore we have a higher level of spiritual energy, whereas the food comes from domim tamech and chai, inanimate, like salt, for example, vegetation, like fruit and vegetables and bread, and chai, animals, like meat, eggs, fish, etc. So how do those items, which are from a lower spiritual life force, sustain the human? So the answer is that it's not the bread itself that sustains us, but it's the godly energy within the bread, and that's what sustains us. But still, we can ask, yes, everything has a godly energy within, but the person also has his own godly energy within, and therefore, how does the godly energy that sustains bread on the 3rd day of creation, Hashem said, told the vegetation, the seeds, to sprout out, but how does that sustain us if we have our own spiritual energy as well? And where Hashem said, "Nasa Adam," let us make a man, and therefore, why do we need to eat other things? The explanation is that domim tamech and chai, the inanimate, the vegetation, and the animals actually have a spiritual source which is beyond us, because their source is from the world of tohu, the world of chaos, which is beyond the world of tikkun, of rectification. Our neshamas, our souls, come from tikkun, whereas the source of the lower forms of life is actually a higher source than us, from tohu, from the world of chaos, where there was great spiritual energy, though it was unregulated, and it crashed. So there was shiras hakelim, the breaking of the vessels of the world of tohu, and then sparks of that holiness, which had been misguided and unregulated, it fell down into our world and became the spiritual source, the life force of physical things. Now the person comes from tikkun, and tikkun is the organized system of spheres, going through the 4 worlds, starting with chachma of Atzilus. The chachma of Atzilus is the highest sphere in the highest world, and although that's a very high spiritual level, but it's still within the organized and systematic flow of godly light, whereas the physical things come from tohu, which is even a greater spiritual light. Now, chachma has a special quality of, like it says in Zohar, but chachma is berira. In chachma, that's where refining happens. Now, the person comes from chachma, and that's why the person has intellect to a whole different scale to animals. Now, the light of tohu was primarily in the midas, in the emotional attributes, and that's where the crash was. Yes, these midas are beyond intellect. They're from what's called behema rabbah, the great behema, the great animal, which beyond person, animal representing emotional attributes, whereas person represents intellectual attributes primarily. But still, the spheres of Torah were the emotions. Now in Eitz Chaim it says that das of Torah also crashed. Das, although it's intellectual, but it's when we personalize the idea to see how it affects us, which is the beginning and the source of emotions, and therefore there was the crash in das as well. It also says that the emotions, not only the emotions themselves, but the moichin sheba midas, the intellect within the emotions, that also crashed. So our animal soul, which comes from this crash of Torah, yes, it's primarily about getting what it wants, but it also uses intellect towards that goal, and that's the intellect within the emotions that crashed from Torah. Over the page. Now, because in Torah there was no hiskalus, there was no inclusion of using chesed and gevurah together, both the kindness and self-expression together with gevurah, severity and restraint. So they're two different sides, and in Torah each sphere felt that it was the only one, and there was no inclusion of both together. So that was one of the causes why it crashed, and the sparks of Torah fell down to the physical world. And that's why we can refine them and bring those sparks of holiness back to their true source. Once those sparks are refined, then they actually have a higher spiritual light than the person himself. And therefore, when we eat food and use the energy of the food for mitzvahs, so then we refine the spiritual light within the food, and that helps, that gives us an energy beyond us, because it's a Torah energy which is beyond tikkun. And this is why it says that man was created only on the sixth day, whereas everything else was created earlier, and that's because they all come from Torah, and therefore essentially in a way they are higher than the person, and that's one of the reasons they were created before the person. Our food helps us and lifts us to the extent that the Gemara in Bava Kama says that Rav Nachman was asked a question and he didn't answer it. Then the next day he answered the question, and Rav Nachman explained the reason that I didn't answer you, that I couldn't answer you when you asked in the evening, is because I hadn't yet eaten my meat, the meat of the ox that he normally ate. So we see that food adds vitality to the person and adds even to his intellect. Similarly, Chazal say that an infant is not able to talk, is not able to say Abba, Father, until he eats. He tastes grain, until he has some sort of food made of grain, bread, or similar. And this is for the same reason, because the food has a higher spiritual source from the world of Torah, higher than the person who comes from Chachma within the worlds of Tikkun, and therefore the food has the ability to add intellect to the person. Similarly, in Avodas Hashem, in our service of Hashem, that when we refine those sparks, there's 280 sparks of Torah in total, and when we refine them through using out physical items for holy purposes, so then we elevate them to their source in tikkun, in how they help the godly soul. So when we say Shema, and when we daven with the energy that we received through eating the food, so then that elevates the food as well, and helps us be mispain, and helps us reflect about Hashem and connect to Hashem and develop a passionate love of Hashem. more than what we could do without the food. And this is not just because physically we've got strength, but because the food has sparks of tohu, and therefore a deeper spiritual energy than we have by ourselves. And this adds also to the intellect and emotions of the godly soul, like we know about Vachayis Noses, that the Chayis, the angels carry the throne, and it says there's the Adam Shalkis, say the supernal man on the throne. So there's the animals, and they lift the person. And similarly, the food lifts and helps the person rise to a higher spiritual level because of its source and tail. Okay, Gimel. Based on this introduction, we can explain regarding eating matzah on Pesach. Zaya says that just as physically a child's not able to speak and say Abba, Father, until he's tasted bread or grain, so too the Jewish people, when they left Egypt, they weren't able to understand about the greatness of Hashem until they had eaten matzah, which is the spiritual bread. And through, just as with physical bread, we are energized, so too with spiritual bread, we are energized in a deeper, more spiritual way to recognize our spiritual Father, to understand about Hashem. Now, chametz rises. It represents ego, whereas matzah is flat. It doesn't rise, and it represents humility and smallness. That we're nullifying our will to Hashem's will, and therefore chametz, ego, that's the source of all negativity. And therefore it's used in both in psukim and in Gemara as a word meaning when we're sinning, where we're doing the wrong thing. For example, the pasuk is chametz levavi, that when my heart has become chametz and therefore become evil. Similarly, in Gemara Shoshana, it talks about with the king, the Persian king Koresh, that originally he was good, and therefore he did this, and then afterwards he went off, and therefore he didn't behave at the same level. So it uses the word kodim shehechmitz and acha shehechmitz. So we could explain now that hechmitz means chametz, and after he has chametz, this sense of ego and selfishness, that's the source of all negativity. Similarly, the Yetzer Hara is called Sa'ur Shebe'isa, the yeast in the dough. Now, in the exile in Egypt, the Jewish people were very sunken into physicality, and the word Mitzrayim means Matzarim, boundaries and limitations. They were stuck within this sense of ego and the physical world in general. Physical items are related to ego because spirituality is conceptual. What's the difference between chesed and gvura? They're a different concept. If you have two pieces of chesed, if they're the same type of chesed, there's only one piece, there's not two. Whereas with the physical world, you could have two things that are exactly the same. What's the difference between them? Well, one is here, then it doesn't let the other one come in. And that's something unique only in the physical world. So they were stuck into this sunken into physicality and materialism and ego. But then there was Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus, which happened through Hashem revealing himself to them. And this was a revelation of Hashem's light as it is beyond his shalshlus, beyond the chain of worlds. And this impacted on them to give them a sense of bittul, of self-nullification, which allowed them to free themselves from the shackle of ego and materialism. This is the meaning of what we say in that Gadol, V'Meir Gadol, that when the pasuk says V'Meir Gadol, that Hashem appeared with great, awesome revelation. So this refers to the Haggadah says Zogilui Shechina. This refers to the revelation of the Shechina. And so Hashem gave us through revealing his light, this mirror, this reverence of him, and that allowed us to free ourselves from all boundaries and limitations of the spiritual Egypt and simply the physical Egypt. Now, this godly revelation happened after midnight, but before midnight, we were already commanded to eat matzah. Even before we were given this gift of freedom from revelation from Hashem, we had to do our own efforts of eating matzah and developing as much self-nullification and humility and smallness that we could, the basic level of yirah, of reverence of Hashem. And that was the preparation and vessel to hold the greater level of yirah, greater level of reverence, which came after the revelation, after midnight. Final column of page Yud Gimel, of Daf Yud Gimel. So now the Zohar calls matzah michla de mehemnusa, the bread of faith. Faith is also a basic bittul we don't understand, but we just have faith. And we're not asking for a reason, we just have faith that this is the truth and this is what we should be doing. And matzah feeds the faith in our soul and nurtures the faith in our soul. Like we said, that bread is once the infant has eaten bread, that's when he can say Abba. And saying the fact that he can say Abba, Father, it doesn't mean that he understands what a father is or understand why he should love his father, but he's just saying Father. He knows this person is called Father, and this person is someone close to him and someone he should love. And that's just this recognition without understanding. This is like the emunah below intellect, the faith below intellect. You might not understand fully, but at least have faith and know the facts. But just as a faith, emunah is a very strong bond with Hashem. So too with the parable of the child who has a very strong bond with his father, and with matzah that connects us with our Father in heaven. And therefore, all of us, every yid is maminim b'nei maminim. We are all believers, children of believers. We know that Hashem existed unchanged before creation and after creation. And the matzah brings us this perspective from Das Elyon, from Hashem's perspective, where Ein Sof, Hashem's unlimited light, which is beyond Chokhmah, beyond intellect, and therefore it is held, it comes down into the vessel of emunah, of faith, which also doesn't need intellect. And therefore matzah nurtures this faith. Now this humility and smallness is like earth. We're like nafshi, like we say at the end of Shemini Esrei, but nafshi ka'avlachotia, that my soul should be like dirt before everyone, that we should be humble before everyone. And this is like earth, and from earth, that's where new vegetation and growth sprouts forth. And this is also the meaning of the idea that there's a discussion, what came first, heaven or earth? So we say practically heaven came first, but conceptually, in potential, earth came first, and that's because of the higher source of earth. That from the smallness, that's where bread comes out, and both faith and then understand, and the faith below understanding and faith above understanding both sprout forth from earth. Okay, so that ends Gimel. Now Dalet. Now, the pasuk says of Shmartem as a matzahs, that you should guard the matzahs. So matzahs need to be protected, that the matzah shouldn't become chametz, that no sense of ego and overinflated sense of self should penetrate matzah. That means that our yira, our basic yiras shamayim, our reverence of Hashem, and the faith that we have within has to be protected, and that's why it says matzahs without a vav, because it's still in a small way and without revelation. Now, matzahs without a vav also comes from the word matzusa, which means quarreling, fighting, like Zaya says, because when we're at a lower levels and there's a constant struggle between our nefesh elikis and nefesh bahamis, our godly soul and our animal soul, and we have to get our yetzer tov, like it says, lolam yagaz adam yetzer tov yetzer, we have to get our yetzer tov angry at our yetzer hara. That is all before midnight. Whereas the second type of matzah after midnight, when Hashem reveals himself, so then it's beyond any struggle and beyond evil. Like the pasuk says, Pasach Hashem, that Hashem leaped over the Jewish homes with the plague of Makas B'cheres, of the killing of the firstborns. So the idea of leaping over represents jumping not just step by step, but beyond step by step, beyond the regular chain of worlds. Now, the Haggadah says that of a Meir Gadol Zogilish China, that when the pasuk says of a Meir Gadol with great awesome might, it refers to the revelation of the Shechina, which is meaning a revelation of godliness beyond Hishalshalus, beyond the chain of worlds that was manifest in their souls at that time. And that's why it uses the term about Hashem, Melech Malchem Lachim, the King of Kings. Malchem Lachim, the King of Kings, refers to Malchus, Hashem's power of kingship within each of the four worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Tirasiya. But Melech Malchem Lachim, the King of Kings, refers to Malchus as it is beyond all four worlds. And this is also what is referred to when the Zayah says, at the beginning of the authority of the domain of the king. That also refers to Malchus as Hashem's kingship, as it is beyond all spiritual worlds. So through this godly revelation of unlimited godly light, so the Golam, that's how the Jewish people were redeemed from all boundaries. Like it says that Hashem came himself, not an angel. This is also why the term Meira Gadol is used. Meira is different to Yira, because Meira is masculine and Yira is feminine. So feminine is more sort of about nurturing within, whereas masculine is directing from above. And so Yira is feminine, and that's the basic Kabbalah soul and Amunah, Malchus within the worlds, whereas Meira Gadol, the great Meira is the, and especially with Gadol, great. So this is Yira law, the higher level of Yira, over onto Yudalid, that is manifest through revelation of Hashem, King of Kings, like we said. And this is the second level of Matzah after midnight. Whereas before midnight, it is the matzah only that gives the basic Yiras Shamayim and basic emunah, the basic faith and reverence of Hashem, which is below intellect, and at that level, that's when the Jewish people are called young, youth, like it says Kinar Yisrael, that we are youthful, we're small, or like the pasuk says that Hashem will remember Chesed Norayach, the kindness of our youth. And this, whereas after midnight, so that's the higher level of Yira and higher level of Bittul, of self-nullification, which is beyond intellect, not below intellect. And that's from a revelation of Hashem's Ein Sof, Hashem's unlimited light. And therefore, this second level of matzah doesn't need protection, because automatically it's impossible for it to become chametz. It's impossible for ego and coarseness to enter. And this is the meaning of what the Haggadah says, that they didn't have a chance. The dough didn't have a chance to become chametz until Hashem revealed himself. This is talking about the second level, that once Hashem reveals himself, it's impossible for it to become chametz. And this is also the meaning of the pasuk that says that they baked matzah ki lo chametz, because it was not chametz. It doesn't just mean it wasn't, but that it couldn't become chametz, because this is the high level of matzah where Hashem has been revealed. And that's why it says, because they have been expelled from Egypt, that we're out of Egypt, and therefore we've got no relationship with materialism and limitations and ego. And therefore we'll never become chametz. So therefore, even though there was enough time for the dough to become chametz, even with kvitzas aderech, even if Hashem miraculously made them move fast, but still there was enough time for bread to become chametz. It doesn't take very long, but it didn't become chametz because of what we explained, that this was the matzah after Hashem revealed himself, that would protect from the Jewish people developing chametz spiritually, and that impacted also that it wouldn't become chametz physically. And that's why it says matzahs with a vav here, because the vav represents revelation. Like we add in davening, when we say in the first bracha of Shemay Esrei, Hagadol, Hagibah, V'Hanaira, we add a vav before V'Hanaira, which represents revelation. On the other hand, the basic matzah is without a vav, and that's with our own meager efforts and emunah below intellect, faith below understanding, and therefore it does need protection, unlike the matzah that we reached after chatzos, after midnight.